So when you're on a ketogenic diet, you're transporting, your fat metabolism goes off the charts, right? And there are various things in our diet that can assist the transport of fatty acids into the mitochondria to be burned as energy. And one of them is carnitine. And if you're burning a lot of fat, many kids on a ketogenic diet become deficient in carnitine. This was observed early on. So carnitine is a very, a useful supplement. Magnesium, some people get cramps. Sodium, it's actually important to kind of load up on sodium, especially when you start the diet initially, because insulin will go way down, and with low insulin, you tend to dump a lot of sodium into your urine.
That's super cool information. I want to, for people who are maybe new to your work or considering a ketogenic diet and as part of, for whatever performance or aesthetics or for health perspectives, what do you see happening? Like, what would be the challenges that it takes to kind of get into, kind of ketosis? And what have you noticed as far as maybe with getting people into it, kind of the levels or stages that they become fat adapted? What are some of the practical components?
Yeah. Well, for a lot of people that I've talked to that gave up the ketogenic diet, it was really, they could not tolerate the high fat. So a lot of people don't understand that a ketogenic diet is really high in fat.
That was my challenge. That was my challenge when I attempted it. Like I would get fat in my stools. It was like I couldn't metabolize. And then Matt developed Capex, which had the 4 lipases, and all of a sudden I could up my fat and I didn't get the fat in my stool. So it was interesting.
I do. So that's a supplement that I do take, especially on days where I'm doing intermittent fasting or I don't get a lot of meals in, but just get 1 or 2 meals in. Obviously, I have to take in a huge amount of fat, and that supplement's extremely helpful in that context. And even, if you're on a ketogenic diet, I think that should even be promoted throughout the clinical realm, where the fat malabsorption and fat intolerance is a big problem. So I think there's a lot of potential for that. So the fat intolerance is a big thing typically in the beginning, and some people can adapt to the high fat intake and some people can't. Some people get nauseous. They have continued GI problems. In the early studies, probably the main side effect that concerned most people, even like federal agencies, was the kidney stones. So kids that follow the ketogenic diet were about a 5 times higher risk for kidney stones. But then follow-up studies were done and paying attention to hydration, and they also used potassium citrate as a supplement to offset the mild metabolic acidosis, which could have resulted in the kidney stones. And then there was really no, correlation. It pretty much, there was no higher incidence of kidney stones when you, hydrate and take a potassium supplement. And then you have things like certain nutrient deficiencies like carnitine. So when you're on a ketogenic diet, you're transporting, your fat metabolism goes off the charts, right? And there are various things in our diet that can assist the transport of fatty acids into the mitochondria to be burned as energy. And one of them is carnitine. And if you're burning a lot of fat, many kids on a ketogenic diet become deficient in carnitine. This was observed early on.
My first paper in nutrition, by the way, was on the carnitine shuttle transporting fats into the cell and acetylenzyme A and how it prevents. So it was very interesting,
Yep. So carnitine is a very, a useful supplement. Magnesium, some people get cramps. Sodium, it's actually important to kind of load up on sodium, especially when you start the diet initially, because insulin will go way down, and with low insulin, you tend to dump a lot of sodium into your urine. So a high level of insulin will facilitate sodium retention, right? So when people, if they're on a ketogenic diet and they eat some carbs, they go off their diet and their face bloats up, they get very bloated. It's a consequence of the carb-induced elevation of glucose, which elevates insulin, which facilitates sodium retention, and then therefore water retention. So that's, you have to really understand some physiology to understand what's happening in your body.
Which that was a big interest. Incidentally, that's the whole thing in bodybuilding, of the difference between dry and hard, or being a spillover in public. Something that we noticed in those really extreme conditions. And now you're saying clinical research is actually confirming what bodybuilders knew 40, 50 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as you restrict water, and you do it wrong and you misfire, boom, you're going to retain water really quick. So like a lot of natural bodybuilders that I know that refuse to use things like diuretics, like Lasix, what they'll do with their contestants is they'll feed them, they'll ramp up their sodium, 2 weeks out, up to where they're getting, 10 to 20 grams of sodium, for really big guys towards the end. And then without having to use a diuretic, they just taper the sodium off, 72 hours gradually before, and then the water comes off real quick because you've trained your body. So then again, you have the renin-angiotensin system is incredibly adaptable. Your metabolism is also incredibly adaptable in regards to macronutrient, the ability to break down, assimilate, digest, and utilize macronutrients for energy. So you can train your metabolism to be fat adapted. And there's also like what I would call a metabolic memory. If you go back to like lifting or bodybuilding, and it takes you, 5 years to work up to a 400-pound bench press, right? And then you take 3 months off, it's not going to take you 5 years to get back up there again. If you drop back down to 200 pounds, you'll get back up there probably in like 2 months, a month, or in a month and a half. The same thing happens with the metabolism. As you train your metabolism through fasting, through carbohydrate restriction, you are opening up pathways associated with beta oxidation of fatty acids, so the metabolism of fats. You are activating a genetic program, if you will, that actually confers enhanced fat metabolism in your body. So if you go back to eating carbohydrates and you've trained your metabolism after months, and you go back to eating fat again, that you'll quickly adapt to producing ketones. So you upregulate various fatty acid oxidation enzymes if you adhere to the diet over a protracted period of time. And you also upregulate things like ketolytic enzymes, ketogenic enzymes, so the enzymes in the liver that are responsible for producing ketone bodies. Interestingly, the liver lacks succinyl-CoA transferase, which prevents the liver from metabolizing ketones for energy. So they spill into the bloodstream, and then tissues, skeletal muscle, heart, and brain have high levels of ketolytic enzymes that allow these tissues to use ketone bodies as an energy source. And if they're elevated over time, especially in the context of insulin suppression and mild hypoglycemia, it basically enhances the upregulation of these ketolytic enzymes across the tissues. And there seems to be a memory that's retained in that. So if you go back to eating carbohydrates and for a couple months and then go back to a ketogenic diet, you can be in a state of fat oxidation and ketosis like 50% faster. Mm-hmm. So this, I think there's a metabolic memory that's probably analogous to a muscle memory. After you've trained your muscles to adapt to a certain scenario, a certain stimulus, the same thing is true for metabolism. It needs to be studied more. We have some preliminary data. Some things need to be published still, but I think anecdotally this was reported, but now I think there's experimental data showing.
Beautiful stuff. I love this. This is so fun.